On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we're going to be talking why this is the most important game of the Lance Leipold era when they take on Kansas State, why it would be the most important win for Lance Leipold. Plus, we'll get into a little stocks up, stocks down after another KU football bye week.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. And thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition, we're breaking down why this is the most important game of the Lance Leipold era at Kansas. We're going to get into why, and then we'll get into a little bit of stocks up, stocks down for the KU football team as we're just past the halfway point and into another bye week for KU this week. Before we get into any of that, today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time, where you can still get tickets to the Sunflower Showdown. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. So to me, this is the most important game of the Lance Leipold era. And obviously you can have the arguments about like what's the biggest win of the Lance Leipold era. I think that's a little bit of a different conversation of what's the biggest win versus what's the biggest game, because the biggest win is a hindsight 2020 thing. It's after the win. The game is leading up into it, right? And so you can say the Oklahoma win a couple of years ago is the biggest win that he's had. And, you know, from that standpoint, maybe it is. But going into that, like you're playing a top 10 or 15 opponent. I forget exactly where they were ranked at the time. If you lose that game, like it doesn't change the trajectory of where you're going as a program. This one feels like it's kind of at a crossroads, right? You're coming off a season in which you took a bit of a step back. You win 9 games, then you go back to 5-7 a year ago. And now this year you're kind of teetering in the middle at 4-3. If you lose this game, you're sitting at 4-4 in a situation over your last 4 games where you're trying to figure out, okay, where are the gimme wins? You think Oklahoma State should be a gimme win, but then it's like tough to find after that. And so this game becomes very important if we're just talking about this individual season. If Kansas wants to make it to a bowl game, you need to win this game to give you your best. It doesn't mean they can't make a bowl game if they lose this one. Doesn't mean they are guaranteed to make it if they win this one. But your easiest path, your best path, like Doctor Strange in Avengers, like there's one way, the one way among the 3 million ways, maybe it's one of the other ways or whatever. But the best way, the best path to that is KU winning this football game if they want to accomplish everything they want to accomplish this season, right? But you just think about like in terms of, okay, you can make an argument it was one of those previous Kansas State games too, okay? But now you've lost those games, and now they've started to mount up, right? Now those games have started to mount up. You're now 0-4 in the Lance Leipold era against Kansas State, and if you include the Missouri game this year against your 2 biggest rivals, you are now 0-5. You need to get on the board now. This is no longer a situation of, okay, well, it makes sense that Kansas lost to Kansas State in 2021, right? Or, of course, you're going to be behind them a little bit in 2022. You've kind of equaled the playing field in 2023 and 2024, and now coming into this year, 2025. You have the better team on paper. You have the better record on paper. We haven't been able to say that much, if at all, in the series. And so you look at these things, and there are just so many. Like Kansas is favored in this game. There's no excuse not to finally get over the edge and win one of your rivalry games here. You need to here. And you talk about Lance Leipold's career impact. This isn't going to determine, like Lance Leipold's going to be the coach of Kansas the rest of this year. He's going to be the coach of Kansas in 2026. This isn't going to change that, right? But it certainly has an impact on what is the legacy of Lance Leipold's time at Kansas and how successful this season is, how successful his tenure is at Kansas, I think really stems to this game right here. Obviously, the in-state recruiting has really picked up for Kansas in a very real way. This class of 2026 in-state is amazing. It's the best in-state class I can remember Kansas having since I've been watching Kansas, covering Kansas, whatever. It's one where I don't know how much the impact of this game specifically affects it. Like, I don't know that, for recruits, like one game specifically is going to sway a decision one way or another. But in terms of you building that momentum with the class of 2026 and now looking to springboard that momentum, right? Momentum's only as good as your next play. Your next play is winning this game to springboard what you're doing in the class of 2026, trying to win this game, and then pushing that into the class of 2027 and the class of 2028, and so on and so forth. And like, you have to start winning these games. I mean, all these kids, think about this. Anybody who is a sophomore in high school, who's a recruit, or depending when you were born, a junior in high school, potentially, depending when you were born, has not been alive for a Kansas win over Kansas State. And again, Kansas done wonders to get these commits in the class of 2026 that I think is going to be an awesome recruiting class for KU and an awesome in-state class for KU. But are you going to be able to replicate that class if you can't start winning these games? That's where that question starts to come in a little bit more. So it's huge from the in-state recruiting. And then if you're looking at in-state recruiting, that has an effect on your future teams as well, right? But just in general, like to have a successful time in college sports, I say this all the time, like college sports, yes, okay. We've boiled things down now. It's all about the playoff and it's all about the national championship and blah, 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 blah. That's where we've gotten in today's day and age with college football and sports in general. It's all about this and that. For me, it's not. And for a lot of people, it's not. It's about, like, yes, those things are great. Those things are cool. You want to aim for those. You want to make those. But it is about the regional aspect of things. That's what college sports were built on. Beating the team 3 hours away from you on a bus ride, beating your rival 2 hours away. Like, those are what this is built on. Those are what the fundamentals of college sports were, outside of the amateurism thing, which that's gone away. But like, just in terms of the regional rivalry, the competition side of it, it was always about that. That's what, just beating your rival mattered for 365, right? And it feels like we've gone away from that a little bit with the structure in the current day and age of college football, but like, it does still matter in a very real way. And it feels like in a lot of these games, Kansas State has just cared more than Kansas. And I know there's certain people that like will throw the joke out there of like, this is Kansas State's Super Bowl, you know, when they play Kansas. And heck, I remember even walking into a Kansas game and then there were like visiting K-State fans and they were being like, it's the Super Bowl. And I know KU fans will make fun of that, but guess what? I would rather the joke be, oh, this is your guy's Super Bowl, but winning the game, than I would be the ones being like, oh, you care too much about the game and we're losing it. I'd rather be on the winning side personally. And it's about damn time that Kansas wins one of these games, right? You lost 16 straight. It's too long. You got to figure this out. You have to find a way. And you know, for Jalon Daniels too, like, does this have a bit of a, like, this would be the biggest win of the Jalon Daniels career, right? Because you think about the Oklahoma game, that was Jason Bean. You think about the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, that was Jason Bean. This would be the biggest, you know, win of Jalon Daniels' career. And I do feel bad because, like, there have been some games that Jalon Daniels has played well that maybe they lost. Like, you think of the Arkansas game, if they would have won that, that would have been the signature win in the bowl game with how big of a comeback it was and the gaudy stats and everything. So it's not always his fault. But point being, this would be the signature win, I think, for both of those guys. I think for Leipold, you would say, okay, the I don't know, biggest resume win would certainly be the Oklahoma one, but this would be the most impactful win, the most important win, because it would end the streak. It would help in future recruiting. It would get the monkey off your back against some of your rivals. I think this is the most important game of the Lance Leipold era to me. And I just wonder what the crossroads is of a win or loss here, right? You think of a win, 5-3, K-State drops to 3-5. Like, what are the roads for the rest of this season? You know, what is the momentum you capitalize if you can win this game? Versus you think about, if you lose this game, you're 4-4. You've blown another opportunity. You're now 0-6 in rivalry games. Are you going to make a bowl game this year? Is all of a sudden there a hot seat in 2026 or 2027? You know, it just becomes a very, very different conversation based on this one game. And I think it's the biggest game of the Lance Leipold era at Kansas. All right, let's continue on. Where stocks up, where stocks down for KU football headed into this game. This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Monarch. And let's be honest, most of us can't even name all our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's very easy to lose track. That can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface, on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch's visual dashboards and smart tools make it so much easier to understand where all my money is going and how to make it work harder for me. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarch.com for 50%. That's half off your first year. Monarch.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. This episode is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season's here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Right now, Kansas 2.5-point favorite over Kansas State. Also saw the over-under is 56.5. Certainly feels like a high number, though I think last year was right at 56. Year before, it would have gone over to that. So it's been close the last couple of years. Year before that, it would have blown over on that one. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. Check out Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. All right, we're stocks up, stocks down for KU football. We did this after the first 3 games, first quarter of the year. This time it comes a little past the halfway point, but another bye week, kind of like the halfway point, kind of like that, second quarter report card, so to speak. So let's start with stocks up for KU football from really where we were after week 3 to where we are now. I'm going to start here. I think stock is up on Jalon Daniels. Jalon was playing well in the first 3 weeks of the season, so that's not like totally different, but I think he's even taking it to another level right now. He's just been really good for Kansas this year. Sitting at the 70% completion rate, 9.4 yards per attempt. That's very good. 1,752 yards with 18 passing touchdowns, 19 total touchdowns, if you count the rushing scores, compared to just 2 interceptions. And he has a really good quarterback, total QBR, I should say, of 78.1, which ranks 19th in the country. Now, he also is sitting on, from a rushing perspective, 199 rushing yards. He would have way more, like if not for the Texas Tech. Okay, so he's lost 123 yards on sacks. That means that he has essentially, realistically, like 320 rushing yards, which would actually be first on the team if college football counted sacks to team pass yards like the NFL does. Because LeSean Williams is first with 309, Daniel Highshaw's second with 231. So technically, Daniels is your leading passer and rusher. Now, on one hand, part of that's because the Highshaw injury. On another hand, that tells you some of the struggles they've had at times running the football. But like with Jalon, he has just been awesome. And even the times where he's like missed a key throw or here or there, it feels like he's always responded and found the answer the next play or the next drive that he's been able to. He's thrown guys open at time. He's thrown into tight windows. I've just been so impressed, man. He's having an unbelievable season for Kansas so far. So stocks up on him with the way that he is playing right now. Bowden Groen, or I think it's Groen is the way to pronounce it. Stocks up on Bowden Groen right now because Bowden Groen is he thrust in. I mean, okay, so you add this guy late. Keon Burnett transfers back to Arizona. And because of that, you had to scramble in the portal. You go get Bowden Groen from Rice, and he comes in. He's behind Deshaun Hanukkah. Hanukkah off to a good start in the season. Then he gets hurt. And Groen, it felt like every now and then was making a big catch, and all of a sudden, he's now the primary tight end, and now he's just going off for Kansas. Even without being the primary tight end to start the season, Groen is second on the team in catches and receiving yards and receiving touchdowns right now. He's having an unbelievable season. He's trending, honestly, to having a kind of all Big 12. I don't know, every other tight end in the league of where he's going to fit into that. But like at the very least, like honorable mention or possibly second team selection. Like he is looking like an all Big 12 tight end right now. Now, I don't know that he's as good of a blocker necessarily as like what you had with, say, a Jared Casey or maybe even a Mason Fairchild who got better at that as he went on with his career at KU. But he's been a big threat and one that Jalon certainly trusts. The stock's up definitely on Bowden Groen. I would say the receiving core as a whole, the stock is rising. And if you want to add Groen to that in terms of like a receiving threat, it definitely felt like through the first 3 weeks of the season, like you saw some flashes. You saw the Wagner game for Emmanuel Henderson. You saw the flash play of Levi Wentz against Missouri on the deep ball. You saw the first game against Fresno State for Cam Pickett. But it didn't really feel like anybody had really put it together for back-to-back weeks yet. And in the weeks since, we've seen Emmanuel Henderson go for over 200 yards against Cincinnati. He currently has 530 yards right now, 4 touchdowns. We've seen Cam Pickett, he had a big game against both UCF and, had some big catches against Texas Tech. We've seen Bryson Canty start to get involved a little bit more. We've even seen Keaton Kubeka make some key catches or key plays for Kansas. I feel like the receiving core is really coming into its own right now. I feel like it's really starting to be a threat. And I think part of it too is Jalon Daniels, but I think they're really simpatico right now, and they're really improving up while Jalon Daniels continues to play well. That's been a nice match. The Dye brothers are somebody who I think stocks up on them. They, kind of started both in the season like, okay, they're going to be backups. And Devin's had to deal with some injuries this year. Jalon got more run in the UCF game, took advantage of it, and he's been playing a little bit more, over the last couple games for KU. But both of those players went from having kind of up and down last year's, which I think a big reason why was just both were, I think, dealing with injuries. But right now, Devin Dye's leading KU in Pro Football Focus grade defensively, 85.3. It's only in 114 snaps because of he had like the targeting call that caused him missed time and then injury and stuff. But still, you look at Jalon Dye as well. Like he's put together some solid games for KU, including that one where against UCF where he had to play more. And overall, he's got a 78.2 PFF grade in 97 snaps. But you combine the snaps between the Dye brothers, over 200 snaps, and basically, if you want to call it around and, just split the difference between the two, like an 81, 82 PFF grade, really good stuff from those players to help a secondary that's needed their support. And then I would also say stocks up on KU being just kind of an average team overall. Through the first 3 games of the season, even after the loss in Missouri, we kind of thought, okay, there could be something here. Like this, they almost beat Missouri. Missouri's a really good team, and you almost beat them on the road. And it was like, maybe Kansas can contend to make the Big 12 title game. Well, what's kind of transpired since, it doesn't really feel like that's a thing to me. It feels more like this is a 6 or 7 win football team, which is kind of your middle of the pack. And it just feels like that in a lot of different directions. Like, Jalon Daniels is the one thing that I would kind of say is exceptional on this team. You look at the running game, it's like, okay, against better opponents, like you've struggled to run the football. But against worse opponents, you've had some games where you have 150, 200, 250 rushing yards. With the offensive line, they've had some games where they've only given up, 0 or 1 sacks, but they've also had the games against Texas Tech where they give up 9 sacks, right? You look at the defense for KU, and it's like they've had some games where they've looked awesome. You look at the West Virginia game, the Fresno State game, the second half of the UCF game, defense looked great. But then you've also seen some moments where they couldn't stop Texas Tech in the second half, or they couldn't stop Missouri or for the game, or Cincinnati for the game. And it's just like in a lot of ways, I think there are a lot of units right now for KU that are average, and that might sound like a slight. It's not necessarily, because again, a 6 or 7 win team, we would have been dying for that 4 years ago. But and again, you're allowed to reach for higher, and you should want higher goals, but also understand that that's not the worst thing in the world either with where we're at right now. But point being, you look at this for KU, and there's just a lot of things that when they're playing really good opponents, they struggle. When they're playing bad opponents, they look really good. And when they play teams that are in the middle, they kind of look around that range too. I think Kansas is just kind of an average football team right now that's being propped up with a really good quarterback right now in Jalon Daniels. Maybe some of that other stuff comes together a little bit more. And if you can get that stuff together and you've got the quarterback play with Jalon Daniels, then you might be cooking, and maybe you can make some noise in this second half. But I think that's where we're at through the first 7 games of the season for KU. All right, where's stocks down? We're going to get to that next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Game Time. College football's here, and kind of scary how far we are into the season. Kind of sad, honestly, but if you haven't been to a game yet, what are you doing? The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, just nothing like it. If you haven't been to the new booth yet either, come on. It is awesome. You got to go check it out. Maybe this is the weekend. Go see K-State, right? Actually getting tickets sometimes, though, it can feel like a battle itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, price jumps at checkout. Use Game Time. It's the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You can still get tickets for the KU K-State game. They're a little pricier, but the good news there is that the reason why they're a little bit pricier is because people are into the game, I think. Obviously, there's going to be probably a good contingent of Kansas State fans that are coming to the game, but don't you want it to be a home field environment? Don't you want to, I don't know, possibly be there for something that hasn't happened in a really long time. You can get tickets as low as $136. You want to sit on the new side of the stadium? Here's my recommendation. Section 115, you can get row 17 on game time, $203. You get a view of the Campanile, you get a view of the new video board. And if it's a special game, you're not going to mind what you paid. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets to Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Hope you're enjoying the new background. Switch it up, change it up a little bit on today's episode. We're going to be joined again by Christian Rao. We had a fun crossover episode with him on Monday. We're going to have another one on Thursday. We're also going to, on Wednesday, have our full game preview for Kansas State a little bit early. And then we're also going to be live at Big 12 Media Days. So we're going to do a KU Basketball Media Days episode. Then Thursday, beyond being with Christian, we're also going to do a KU Louisville basketball exhibition episode. So we got plenty coming at you on the show and a bunch of recaps coming this weekend too. So make sure you're subscribed to the show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. All right, we're stocks down for KU from basically the end of week 3 to where we are now, a little past the halfway point of the season. I would say KU in the trenches. The first 3 games, we felt like, okay, KU couldn't run the ball against Missouri, but overall, like the D-line felt pretty solid, and, the O-line was at least holding up in pass protection. And it felt like the D tackles had been the strength of the team or the defense. I feel like over these last 4 games since that point, the Cincinnati game, it felt like you didn't get enough there. Felt like in the first half of the UCF game, you weren't getting much traction stopping their run game. Obviously, against Texas Tech, you couldn't do that. And then obviously in terms of your blocking, like you haven't been the best running team. And you look at some of the rushing stats you've allowed over these last couple games, and then you look at what Texas Tech did on the ground in addition to the sacks they had on you. It feels like since week 3, it's been stocks down a little bit on the offensive line. Now, the good news for KU is that ideally you're not playing a defensive line again as good as Texas Tech. But where is that line of where they're going to struggle with, right? Is it how they can do against Kansas State, who's up there in sack rate, top 30 in the country? But I don't know how much of that's from the D-line versus scheme. We'll get more into that later in the week. Arizona's got a pretty good sack rate. Like Utah's got some dudes up there. So it'll be interesting how KU handles those things. Certainly you would think the bye week's going to be helpful, both in terms of guys getting healthy, guys who are playing through things. Like Lance Leipold kind of referenced at his press conference, Calvin Clements is playing through some stuff, which kind of adds up to some of the inconsistencies there. So maybe that helps him in a big way for KU. But certainly that's been something that is it hasn't been as good the second quarter of the season to what it was the first quarter. I would say KU coverage overall is stocks down right now. But honestly, if you're just looking at the last week or 2, it's stocks back up. So it's kind of like after week 3, I don't know, against Missouri, it was starting to angle down. And then all of a sudden it angled back up a little bit in the West Virginia game, and then it plummeted in the Cincinnati game, right? And then it got up off the mat a little bit in the UCF game. And then in the Texas Tech game, the first quarter of the game, it drops back down a little bit. And then the rest of the game, it's soaring back up. I think overall, probably a little bit down, but again, it feels like it's heading back in the right direction now, which actually is exciting because there's a lot of young players. So there's reason to believe it could finish the season on an upward high. That when we talk about, the next stock's up, stock down, next time we do this, the coverage and those young players in the secondary is going to be more stocks up. Entirely possible. But certainly with some of the games that KU had over this last quarter, that was certainly a struggle for KU on that end. I would also say stocks down for DK McDonald over the second quarter of the season. It felt like stocks were soaring on DK McDonald through the first 3 games of the year, really the first 4 games for KU. But now it just feels like it's oh, what's going on here? I do think he's gotten a little bit unfair of I've already seen people on social media and so, which I guess this is the nature of the beast. That's just emotional, instant reaction, overreaction. A lot of times that's how things work like that. But has been a little unfair to him from standpoint of he's still in his first year as the defense coordinator at KU. And some of the things that he is doing are very exotic in a way that probably does take time to get going. And there's been a lot of references in the press conferences from the different coaches about guys just kind of lining up wrong or doing the wrong assignment. Now, there is a certain onus on the coach if that keeps happening. Like, is it too complicated, or are you recruiting the wrong players? I don't know, but like, I tend to like some of the exotic things that DK McDonald has done. I know it's not always working, but like, I'm not gonna necessarily just be like, oh, let's, KU needs to move on after 1 year of DK McDonald. Like, can we give it a little bit of time here? Can we give it a little bit of time? But yeah, certainly the last 4 weeks, you feel worse about it than you did the first 3 weeks. I would say that, even though, I still think there's some really good things that he's doing on that end, even if it always hasn't appeared in the box score, so to speak. And then the last stocks down is ever expecting a less conservative approach. That's just something we've talked about a lot, but like, whether it's the game management stuff, the timeouts, the not being aggressive enough, like whatever you want to call it, that stuff has just been a bugaboo for a while. And I just don't really think it's going to change, to be completely honest. And so that's just something Kansas is going to have to overcome. It is unfortunate because Kansas is both in a conference and at a talent level and as a team is not that different from a lot of the teams they're playing on a week-to-week basis. And so a lot of times in these close games, it's going to come down to the little minute details. It's going to come down to the little things that can sway the game up and down. And so does that limit your ceiling? Yes, it kind of does. There are certain times you're going to win because of it, but that's kind of the nature of the beast. And so I don't really expect that to change. I don't know, like, at what point, because it's one of those things where it's like, it bugs you a little bit. Then again, like, Andy Reid this year with the Chiefs has gotten a little more aggressive on fourth down. So maybe eventually it does come around. But like, I don't know, like, at what point, it's one of those things where it's frustrating, but it's also like, if it's never going to change, why are we still talking about it? I don't know. I go back and forth between the two, but that's just kind of where I feel with that. So we'll see how KU does against K-State. You hope that there's a big stocks up arrow after the weekend ahead. And that'll do it for this episode of the show. You can find our podcast anywhere you get show, including on our YouTube page, which you can like and subscribe to the show there. We'll see you next time. We got KU basketball content, more KU football, K-State content, all that coming at you right here with Locked On Jayhawks.